If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the question box. We'll answer as many questions at the end as time allows. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with a link to replay today's broadcast. Let's get started. Hosting today is Chuck Codwell, Vice President and National Director of Consulting and BOLI Services. Chuck is going to walk us through several factors today that could make the defined benefit plan a game changer for many employers. Welcome, Chuck, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks very much, Lizzie. I appreciate it, and thanks to all of you who are joining us this afternoon. This is kind of an interesting topic because if you've been around for a while and you've seen your defined benefit plans kind of slowly but surely disappearing, I think there are several reasons why that may stop happening and actually might go in the other direction. So some of you know who I am. I'm one of our consultants here at Pentegra. We work with our clients, managing relationships, managing their retirement programs, both the IRS qualified, non-qualified plans. But today what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the defined benefit plan. There has been a long history of these plans. These go back to the 30s. And probably I would say for the first 50 to 60 to maybe even 70 years of existence, the defined benefit plan was really the cornerstone of an employer's retirement program. It provided good benefits for retirement, benefits that the employees did not really have to do much in terms of managing the plan themselves. They simply were employed and they got to accrue benefits. And in the early stages, and I'm going to say early being back in the 80s and 90s, and if you've been a Pentegra client for that period of time, you may remember that many plans were overfunded. As a matter of fact, the multiple employer plan here at Pentegra hit its full funding limitation in 1987 and stayed that way probably until the early 2000s. So clients really didn't have to make contributions. But that all changed in the 2000s, early 2000s, when interest rates dropped significantly. And as you may remember, interest rates drive costs here, especially today with all the various pension legislation. The lower the interest rate, the higher the cost. So low rates really turned the pension, defined benefit pension industry upside down. As a result, what did we have? We had employers who were redesigning their plans. They would reduce accrual rates. They might create separate benefit structures for new hires, lower benefits. Some went so far as to soft freeze, where you're not enrolling new hires. And many clients have hard frozen those plans, where the plan is still alive, still subject to valuation results and investment results, but benefit accruals have ceased. So what I'd like to talk about is what has been changing slowly but surely over the years. And there are four primary factors that we'll discuss today. The interest rates, regulatory relief. There have been a slew of pension legislation enacted since 2006. COVID. Nobody planned on COVID, but COVID hit, and it really changed the way people work. And it really changed employee expectations, which is why this is part of our factors. And that created a lot of hiring challenges. We see it today at Pentegra. So the agenda. I'm going to break it into a couple of different factors here. If we were to look at your defined benefit experience in the past, I think most of us would agree the one thing that hurts defined benefit plans is cost volatility. And cost is a function of a number of things, investment results for sure, but with all the pension legislation we've had, interest rates have become the number one factor in determining pension costs. And we'll get into that in more detail. So interest rates have certainly changed, and that's going to be a big discussion. The hiring environment, with COVID, what did COVID do? It forced people home. I would say most of Pentegra is still working from home, and I'm going to dare guess that most of our Pentegra employees will remain at home working into the future. There's certainly a lot of hybrid employment opportunities out there where people come in a couple of days a week, but I think that has forever changed. We're going to talk a little bit about liability-driven investing. And if you guys have listened to me in the past, we've talked a little bit about that investment strategy, but that really helps to reduce volatility in pension costs too. And then the last item will be plan design options, because there are new plan design options that may help with reducing that cost volatility again. And then I'm going to close up by talking about frozen plans in particular and why those frozen plans might want to reconsider their freeze. So let's start by taking a look at one of those four elements that I've talked about, and that's today's employer challenges. COVID back in 2019 forced a lot of us home to continue working. And, we were lucky. We're in a business where we could work from home. Lots of people couldn't do that. But it also changed the way employees now expect to work. And when you're talking to new employees, and we talk to them all the time, first thing out of their mouths is, can I work from home? That is making the hiring challenges more difficult. It's not just about salary, it's about flexibility. So when you're dealing with new employees and this newfound authority that they have to demand certain things, finding new ways of differentiating yourself is going to be key. Sure, you can do it in salary to some degree. You can do it in health benefits, cost sharing. Maybe we'll even get to, because it's part of one of the new pieces of legislation, if you've got student loans, employees with student loans, can we match their loan payments? I think that is something that will come to pass. We've got a long ways to go to implement it, but that's going to be new and different. But outside of that, if you're looking for ways to differentiate yourself, you might want to go back and consider the defined benefit plan, because today most don't have them, or if they do, they're frozen. The other element that has changed a great deal, and this goes back to probably 2006, are liability interest rates. And there was a time when I would have said to you that the two most important elements to driving costs in a pension plan were interest rates and investment return. I would tell you now that liability interest rates are the key. And we'll touch on a few of the pieces of legislation, but what is most important today in determining your minimum required contributions are the interest rates mandated to be used. And as you probably are aware, the lower the interest rate, the higher the cost. So now that we're seeing short-term interest rates rise, that has had some very positive implications to pension plans. Last year, we had the American Rescue Plan Act that came out, and it had a couple of very positive aspects to pension costs. And to me, the one that is the most positive is when you're looking at interest rates that we have to use to drive cost. We use IRS segment rates, and there's 3 of them, each with a different interest rate. Well, ARPA set a floor interest rate in those segment rates, which is tremendous, because we know, and if you were in some of the valuation discussions we've had in the past, we are using today to drive your minimum required contributions a 25-year average of corporate bond yields, these segment rates. The law says we use 95% of that. What this is telling you is each one of those 3 segment rates cannot be less than 4.75%. That is a tremendous help to funding volatility in your pension plans. And subsequent to ARPA, we had another piece of legislation that said we're going to use these smoothing techniques through 2035. And during this time, if interest rates continue to rise, we will see plans become overfunded again, and for long periods of time. And the fact that if interest rates were to drop again, this floor adds a significant layer of protection. The third element is liability-driven investing. And we've talked about this some over the past. We've been doing this forever. Liability-driven investing simply says We want to minimize funding fluctuation by matching assets and liabilities. And how do we do this in our key multiple employer plan? We've created this item called a cash flow match. And all it is a dedicated bond portfolio whereby we are matching emerging liabilities from retiree payments with assets. At the end of the day, why does a pension fund exist? It is to pay retiree benefits. That is our number one goal. We're not out there trying to outperform the market necessarily. We want to be able to pay benefits. And that's why liability-driven investing has become so important. Besides matching those liabilities, we can reduce pension contribution fluctuations. And that is a key element if you really want to maintain a defined benefit out into the future. The fourth element is plan design. And plan design options have existed forever. In your traditional defined benefit plans, typically there was a formula, 1% times service times high five. There's always been a career average salary. It hasn't been popular because in a defined benefit plan, what we were trying to do, we were trying to provide a level of retirement income so that when somebody retired, they could maintain their pre-retirement standard of living. That is more difficult to do with a career average salary. On the other hand, traditional defined benefit plans have been using these formulas using final pay, high five averages or high three averages, as the basis of their compensation. That increases the cost of the plan. So when I can see defined benefit plans coming back into play, my guess is we're going to be looking at more career average salary type programs, which is similar to a 401k. That's what a 401k plan does. It uses career average salary to base benefits. That cash balance design on the right is still a defined benefit plan. It's an alternative design to your traditional formulas. By designing the plan to look and smell like a defined contribution plan, there's a hypothetical account balance. And what's going into the plan is basically an earnings credit and interest. And at the end of the day, people are seeing hypothetical account balances, something that is a little bit more relatable, I think, to the average employee. So you have some design elements here that can also help reduce cost and cost volatility. So I talked about legislation. One of the latest pieces of legislation was Secure 2.0. This was put into play last December. And like much of the pension legislation that's out there, it's always part of another broader piece of legislation. But this has done a couple of things that will really help the defined benefit cost volatility. And the biggest one is that third bullet. If you have a defined benefit plan, it's insured by the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. And there are two premiums that we all pay if you're running a defined benefit plan. There's a per head charge, flat rate premium, and then there's this variable rate premium. And it's the variable rate premium that over the last few years has skyrocketed, causing many plans to pay large sums of expense. Well, the good news is that the Act has capped the variable rate premium. And the way this works is we look at a plan's funded level, and if it's underfunded according to the PBGC, then you are paying $52 for every $1,000 of unfunded vested benefit. Well, we now know that that's capped. And in prior years, it was indexed for inflation. So you never really knew where it was headed. You just knew it was headed upwards. So that's a big deal. That is a plan expense item that has been a pretty big expense over the last few years that is capped. Mortality is also plays a role in pension costs, and this act has limited the rate at which mortality is projected to improve. If mortality improves, that is, we're living longer, that increases costs of plans. So limiting that also is helping to reduce cost. What I want to do in the next couple of slides here is just take a look at some historical funding levels. Again, If you remember, this is based on the top 100 corporate pension plans, and it goes back to 2000. That's just when the funding, the overfunding of plans started to turn around in the early 2000s. So prior to 2000, you would have seen large overfunded amounts. And that changed in the early 2000s with interest rates dramatically reduced. What happened in 06 and 07? Well, we had a pretty good market. Then the market took a hit in 08, 9, 10. And so your funding ratios went down. And so what I'm going to jump to is all the way over in 2002. Despite 2002 struggling from a market perspective, we still are overfunded today. Many plans are overfunded. And that's happening because of the interest rate rise. So what's going to happen? If interest rates continue to rise, funding is going to go and look even better. So that's one of the other considerations. And I wanted to take a look too at, this slide here. My computer is misbehaving. I apologize. This historical funding level is looking at Pentegra's multiple employer plan. And in 21, we had some pretty good market performance. We measure under the multiple employer plan your market performance on every June 30. So if I look back at June 30, 21, market assets were doing very well. If you look in 2022, when the market has struggled, look at that top green line though. It continued to go up in terms of a funding level because what's happening is the reduction in liability interest rates or the increase in short-term rates had a much larger impact on funding levels than the poor market performance. So historically, I think we're back to looking at greater funding levels than we had in the recent past. And really, what is driving this? What's driving this are the short-term interest rate increases. So again, the math works like this. As rates rise, liabilities fall, and your costs come down. And what you can see here in the graph is the discount rate and annuity pricing. And it's really telling us that active pension plans, when interest rates are rising, their liabilities are falling, and it makes it cheaper to actually fund benefits. And it's really that third bullet. Rising rates reduce liabilities faster, that's the key, than asset values. So even though our market performance isn't as good as we would like, it's still resulting today in improved funding ratios. So I think it starts to talk about, or maybe there's some reasons why we should reconsider defined benefit plans. And what I wanted to do with this slide is just do a brief comparison of the two principal types of retirement plans. And certainly over the last, I'm going to say 20 years for sure, certain, probably 30 years, there's been a move away from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans. Your 401k plans are defined contribution plans. But you might be interested in knowing that if these two plans were set up to provide the same level of benefit, it's actually less costly to do that under a defined benefit plan than a defined contribution plan. Why? It's because the investment returns, which exceed assumptions, would actually reduce employer costs under a defined benefit plan. That happens in a defined contribution plan. It doesn't help the employer's costs. It simply would improve benefits for the participants. Now, to be quite honest, people are not setting up defined contribution plans to provide that same level of defined benefit. That would be enormously expensive on a defined contribution basis. So what you've seen, the reason for the move, is that defined contribution plans have been less expensive to maintain. But make no mistake, the reason they're less expensive is the benefits are lower. They're significantly lower. And also remember, in a defined benefit plan, when you were using final pay, for example, as your definition of salary, defined benefit plans take into consideration the age of your participants, their salary levels. So a defined benefit plan would, by design, provide greater benefits for long service, higher paid individuals. That's all on a much more even keel with a defined contribution plan because it's a percentage of salary. One of the biggest difference to me in a defined benefit versus defined contribution is the investment side. All the investment risk in a DB plan is with the employer. We as participants, it doesn't matter what the markets are doing, it doesn't affect our benefits. In a defined contribution plan, the investment risk is with the participant. So if we're doing well with our investments, our benefits are going up. If we're losing money in the market, our benefits are going down. So that's a big distinction between the two types of plans. And I would say this, and you're going to see some survey results in a second. One of the benefits of a defined benefit plan is it provides monthly income for life. You can't outlive the benefit. It provides much greater security than an account balance type plan, whether it's a profit sharing plan or a 401k plan. On the other hand, if you look at that parenthetical in the last bullet, there is a move afoot to consider putting annuity options within a defined contribution plan. And if you're in our defined contribution plan, you can buy an annuity through the outside the plan. But in consideration here, we may see annuities built into your defined contribution plans going forward because it's that important. Another big distinction is that PBGC insurance. So there's a certain level of benefit in your defined benefit plans whereby benefits are insured. Your defined contribution plans don't have that same insurance. So that's a big distinction as well. So one of the things that we've done over the years in the pension industry is we've talked about this three-legged stool concept, right? Benefits coming from Social Security, employer-sponsored programs, and individual savings. Well, I thought I'd give you a few tidbits of information along those three pillars. Did you know Social Security represents 1/3 of income for those over 65? And if we excluded wages that they might be earning, it's over 40%. There is a significant segment of the American population that relies solely on Social Security benefits for their retirement income. And as we've talked about for years, we all know the Social Security trust is in trouble. And if we don't do something different, there's not going to be a trust there to support these benefits. I am 100% convinced we will do the right thing to shore up that program. It's too important. And all you have to do is talk to your kids, and you'll find out that most of them don't believe they're going to even have Social Security. I don't believe that, but we've got a lot of work to do to shore it up. What about the employer-sponsored programs? Well, we've seen this shift from defined benefit to defined contribution probably for the greater part of 30 years. But what has it done? It has reduced employer costs, no doubt. But it also leads to lower levels of income replacement. And in this business, we're always striving to try to reproduce 70 to 80% of our final pay from all sources, not just the employer-sponsored plans, but from all sources, so that we can maintain a pre-retirement standard of living. That's not happening today. And the primary reason is because we're relying on DC plans. So there are a lot of reasons why employers should be looking at their defined benefit plans. Primarily, from a social standpoint, is to getting our people ready for retirement and affording to be able to retire. That's a key. Because if they can't afford to retire, there are going to be some consequences. That means people will be working longer. They'll be working into their late 60s, early 70s. You won't be able to turn over those people because they can't afford to. So there are things that we really need to look at if we want to try to make this right for both employers and participants. And what about that third pillar? That third leg was individual savings. I don't know if it surprises anybody to look at that first bullet. It surprised me a little. That the savings rate in the United States has been declining over the last 50 years. I think in more recent years, it might have been an uptick, except for COVID. And COVID, which changed the world for so many of us, those savings rates went down even further. And if this was if all we had was a defined contribution plan and we were simply saving 5%, we're not going to come anywhere near with Social Security and employer-sponsored defined contribution plans to meeting that 70, 80%. So that's why I'm saying here, I think there's good reason to start reconsidering your defined benefit plans. And this has always been a big question. Forever. Are defined benefit plans valued by employees? And I think a lot of employers drew the conclusion they weren't. And if they're not being valued, why should we have them? And there is some truth to this in that it is difficult to appreciate a defined benefit plan because they typically are expressed as an accrued or an earned benefit, payable at 65, and for so many employees, they can't even see that far. But we've been looking at some surveys, and this doesn't surprise anybody, but if you looked at workers under 30, they change jobs frequently, of course they do, and they lose the value of their DB plan, especially if they're not vested. Well, those surveys are also indicating that these same employees are even more likely to leave because they're dissatisfied with their retirement program. That is some new information, at least for me. Portability, yes, we've understood that for a number of years. Retirement portability is a high priority from this group. That's a continuation. But this is relatively new. 85% of that young worker group says receiving a fixed lifetime benefit is also a high priority. Lifetime benefits. You can't get that from a defined contribution plan. So I think what we're beginning to see is the younger set in our population today is beginning to put higher priorities on things that are years away. In this very last bullet, if we looked at who left jobs in 2021, over 40% left because of inadequate retirement benefits. It's beginning to mean more to the younger population. I have a few minutes left, and I'm just going to close up by looking at specifically the frozen plans. And I'll bring this all on at once so that we can get through this. Many of you have frozen your plans so that you have a plan that is still alive. It's still subject to ongoing actuarial evaluations and investment gains and losses, but nobody's accruing benefits. So over time, as I said in the opening remarks here, we've had a lot of employers modify their plans to reduce costs, cutting back benefits, soft freezing, eliminating new hires. The hard freeze is really what we're addressing here. But with the rise in interest rates, it's going to make these programs less expensive. And again, remember, if you couple that with positive investment performance, then you have two very real positives, reducing volatility and cost. And again, just a quick comparison. I think I probably have said most of this. But the biggest distinction, I think, between defined benefit and defined contribution is that guaranteed, secure lifetime income that you can get from a defined benefit plan. And we have lots of clients who have both. And if you were here in the 80s when 401k really got started, it was started as a supplemental plan to a defined benefit plan. It was never intended to replace it. It simply doesn't do the same things. It is less expensive generally to maintain than your traditional defined benefit plan, but defined benefit plans now have a lot of design tools to reduce their overall costs. And the fact that you don't have investment results that change your level of benefit under a defined benefit plan is kind of key as well. And I have seen an uptick in these cash balance plans, whereby instead of the traditional defined benefit plan, we're looking at an account balance type program similar to a 401k in that feature, which is being based on not a plan formula to say, but earning credits and interest returns. So there's a good reason to have both of these. It's all about managing expectations, cost volatility, and I think there's a lot of new tools that we have at our disposal to be able to do that. And maybe some of the things you don't remember here is turnover. Defined benefit plans can reduce turnover. Why? Because as you age, you really begin to see the value of your defined benefit plan and understand that it is a lifetime income. And if you reduce turnover, well, you're also reducing acquisition costs. I would argue that a defined benefit plan is something that people are beginning to recognize, the younger people. I would say middle-aged and older people have always recognized it, but the younger people are beginning to realize the benefit. Don't forget that it's insured. Okay, our defined contribution plans are not. Don't forget the fact that it has comprehensive benefit coverage. Many of you with active defined benefit plans probably have death and or disability benefits inside. Early retirement provisions. You might even have cost of living adjustments. Those are comprehensive benefit coverage you don't get in a defined contribution plan. So I've gone by my 30 minutes by a couple of minutes. Let me just wrap this up by saying there are several things that have occurred recently and over time that are working to benefit the creation and maintenance of a defined benefit plan. Rising rates for sure. Regulatory relief, I don't think that's going away anytime soon. COVID started the workplace challenges that I think employees today assume will remain in effect forever. And there are these new plan design elements that make your defined benefit plans less costly and less volatile to maintain. So at the end of the day, when you look at, you've got X number of dollars in your budget to spend on retirement benefits, I think you want to take a look at how best to do this and consider restructuring or modifying them to meet today's employees' needs and benefit objectives. Remember, benefit programs like these affect all of your employees. You have non-qualified plans that are obviously in place for executives and directors, but these plans, your defined benefit plans, your 401k and the like, affect everybody in your organization. So it's a crucial decision and a component of any organization's strategy to maintain for now and into the future. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you all for being part of this. We probably run out of time for questions, but if you have them, you can submit them. We will answer them. All of you should have plan consultants or advisors assigned to your relationships. If you have questions, please reach out. They'll be happy to help with you. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.